Sarah Martinez thought it was just another Tuesday. She had no idea that in exactly 47 minutes, a 70-year-old stranger would make a decision that would expose a shocking truth about her past and change both their lives forever. What started as a simple act of kindness would unravel a 40-year-old mystery, reveal a connection neither of them saw coming, and prove that sometimes the universe has a plan. But first, you need to understand what Frank Morrison had been hiding for 4 decades and why helping Sarah that day would force him to confront the most painful secret of his life. By the end of this story, you'll know the answers to 3 questions that no one in Millbrook, Ohio saw coming. Why did Frank Morrison carry the same $20 bill in his wallet for 40 years, never spending it, never letting it go? What was the real reason Sarah Martinez moved to this small town 6 months ago, leaving behind everything she knew in Phoenix? And how did a grocery store receipt change everything we thought we knew about the Morrison family disappearance that haunted this town for decades? The answers will shock you. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began, to a cold December night in 1983, when everything Frank Morrison believed about family, love, and loss was shattered in ways he never imagined possible. Before we continue deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Martinez had been running her entire adult life, though she would never admit it to anyone, not even herself. At 34, she was a woman who had learned to carry her pain quietly, the way her mother had taught her before everything fell apart. 6 months ago, she packed everything she owned into a beat-up Honda Civic and drove 400 miles from Phoenix to Millbrook, Ohio, a town so small it barely registered on most maps. She told her new neighbors she was looking for a fresh start, a place where her kids could grow up safe and happy, away from the chaos of the big city. But Sarah was actually running from something much deeper than urban stress or financial troubles. The truth was that Sarah Martinez wasn't even her real name. She had been living under this identity for so long that sometimes she almost forgot who she used to be, almost forgot the little girl who once had a different name, a different family, a different life entirely. Her real name was Amy Morrison, and she was carrying secrets that would have destroyed her if she had let them surface. 3 jobs barely kept her family afloat in their tiny apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. She worked the morning shift at the diner, cleaned offices in the afternoon, and stocked shelves at the grocery store 3 nights a week. Her children, Emma, aged 8, and Jake, aged 5, didn't know that some nights their mother went to bed hungry so they could eat, didn't know that she sometimes sat in her car after work and cried until her eyes were red and swollen. But Sarah had learned to be strong, learned to smile even when her world was crumbling, because that's what mothers do. They carry the weight so their children don't have to. What her kids also didn't know was that their mother carried a photograph in her wallet, hidden behind her driver's license. A photograph that she had been staring at for 23 years. It was old and faded, creased from being handled so many times, and it showed a man with kind eyes and gentle hands, holding a little girl who looked exactly like Emma. The man was her grandfather, and the little girl was her. Before everything changed, before the running began, before she learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. Frank Morrison was 73 years old and had been alone for longer than he cared to remember. His neighbors in Millbrook knew him as the quiet widower who lived in the big house on Elm Street, the one who fed the stray cats and kept his lawn perfectly manicured even though no one ever visited. They saw him at the grocery store on Tuesdays, at the diner every Thursday morning, at church every Sunday morning in the 3rd pew from the front, always alone, always polite, always carrying himself with the dignity of a man who had learned to bear his burdens in silence. But what they didn't know was that Frank Morrison was slowly drowning in guilt and grief that had been eating away at him for 4 decades. Every night for 40 years, Frank would descend into his basement, past the furnace and the storage boxes, to a small corner where he kept a wooden chest that his wife Margaret had given him for their first anniversary. Inside that chest were newspaper clippings, police reports, missing person flyers, and letters he had written but never sent. But more than anything else, the chest contained hope. The stubborn, desperate hope of a man who refused to believe that the people he loved most in the world were really gone. The police had given up after 2 years. The FBI had closed the case after 5. The town had moved on, found new tragedies to whisper about, new mysteries to solve. But Frank never stopped believing that somewhere out there, his daughter Lisa and his granddaughter Amy were alive, waiting for him to find them, waiting to come home. Lisa Morrison had been 28 years old when she vanished with her 4-year-old daughter on that December night in 1983. She was Frank's only child, the light of his life, a young woman who had inherited her mother's kindness and her father's stubborn determination. Amy was the joy of Frank's golden years, a little girl who called him Grandpa Frank and made him paper crowns and insisted he was the king of their living room kingdom. They had been staying at Frank's house that week because Lisa's husband, Amy's father, was out of town on business. At least, that's what Lisa had told him. Frank would learn years later that there had been no business trip, that Lisa had been planning something, that she had been scared in ways she never let on. On the morning of December 15th, 1983, Frank woke up to find their beds empty, their clothes gone, and only a single red mitten left behind on Amy's bedroom floor. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. Just absence where love used to be. For months, Frank convinced himself that Lisa had taken Amy somewhere safe, somewhere temporary, that they would call or write or just show up at his door with explanations and apologies. But months turned into years, years turned into decades, and Frank Morrison learned what it meant to live with a broken heart that never quite learned how to heal. The Morrison family disappearance became the story that defined Millbrook for an entire generation. In a town where the biggest news was usually the high school football team's chances at state championships, the sudden vanishing of a young mother and her child was the kind of mystery that people talked about in hushed voices at the post office and the barber shop. The police launched the biggest investigation in the county's history, interviewing hundreds of people, following leads that stretched across 3 states, bringing in experts and psychics and anyone who claimed to have information about what might have happened to Lisa and Amy Morrison. The prevailing theory, the one that the police eventually settled on, was that Lisa had taken Amy and left voluntarily. They found evidence that she had been withdrawing money from her bank account in small amounts for weeks before the disappearance. They discovered that she had been asking questions about how to change identity documents, how to start over in a new place with a new name. The police concluded that Lisa Morrison was running from something or someone, and that she had planned her disappearance carefully, methodically, with the precision of someone who knew she might only get one chance to escape. But Frank never believed that theory, never accepted that his daughter would leave without telling him, without giving him a chance to help, without letting him say goodbye to the granddaughter who meant everything to him. He hired private investigators with money he couldn't afford to spend. He traveled to other states following leads that always turned out to be dead ends. He appeared on television shows and in newspaper articles, pleading for information, begging anyone who might have seen Lisa and Amy to come forward. But as the years passed, the trail grew colder, the leads became fewer, and Frank Morrison learned to live with the terrible possibility that he might never know what happened to the 2 people he loved most in the world. The town eventually stopped talking about the Morrison disappearance, at least out loud. New families moved in, new stories emerged, and the mystery became part of Millbrook's folklore, something that older residents would mention to newcomers as an example of how even small towns can hide dark secrets. But Frank never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that somewhere out there, Amy Morrison was growing up, becoming a woman, maybe even having children of her own, carrying his blood and his love forward into a future he might never see. Sarah Martinez was having the kind of day that tested every ounce of strength she had built up over the years. Emma had woken up with a fever that morning, which meant no school and no daycare for Jake either, which meant Sarah had to miss her morning shift at the diner. which meant $12 less in her weekly paycheck, $12 she couldn't afford to lose. She had spent the morning at the free clinic waiting 3 hours to be told that Emma had a virus that would run its course in a few days, and that Jake's persistent cough was probably just allergies, but they should keep an eye on it. By the time they got to the grocery store, Sarah was already running on empty, emotionally and financially. She had exactly $31.50 in her wallet, money she had counted and recounted 3 times that morning, money that had to cover groceries for the rest of the week. She moved through the store methodically, checking prices, doing math in her head, choosing the store brand over name brands, putting back items that her kids wanted but she couldn't afford. Emma trailed behind her, pale and tired, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Jake pushed the cart, trying to be helpful, but occasionally bumping into displays, earning disapproving looks from other shoppers who clearly had never tried to grocery shop with sick children and an empty bank account. Sarah knew her routine by heart. She would buy enough food to last until Friday, when her next paycheck would give her a little breathing room, at least until the next crisis hit. Rice, pasta, canned vegetables, generic cereal, milk that was close to expiration but half the price of the fresh stuff. She avoided the meat section because protein was a luxury she couldn't afford, avoided the bakery because the smell of fresh bread made her remember better times when money wasn't something she thought about every waking moment. She was good at this dance of poverty, good at making a little stretch a long way, good at convincing her children that generic macaroni and cheese tasted just as good as the name brand version. But as she approached the checkout line, Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach, the fear that she had miscalculated somewhere, that the total would be more than she had, that she would have to choose what to put back while other customers waited and judged. She had been in that position before, had felt the burning shame of holding up a line while she decided between bread and milk, between her children's lunch and their dinner. 3 people were ahead of her in line, including an elderly man with a walking cane who kept glancing back at her children with what looked like curiosity, or maybe recognition, though Sarah was certain she had never seen him before. The cashier was a teenager with purple hair and tired eyes who had clearly been working too many hours for too little pay. Someone who understood the struggle, even if she didn't understand Sarah's specific situation. She scanned each item with mechanical efficiency, the beeping of the scanner creating a rhythm that matched Sarah's increasingly rapid heartbeat. $37, $42, $45. Sarah watched the numbers climb on the display screen with growing horror, knowing that she had made a mistake somewhere, miscalculated somehow, and that she was about to face her worst nightmare in front of a line of strangers who had places to be and no patience for her problems. $47.83. The cashier looked at Sarah expectantly, hand outstretched for payment, while Emma tugged on her mother's jacket and Jake started to whine about being hungry. Sarah stared at the total on the screen, doing desperate math in her head, wondering how she could have been so wrong, so stupid, so careless with money she didn't have to spare. She reached into her wallet with trembling hands, knowing that she only had $31.50, knowing that she was about to humiliate herself and her children in front of everyone. That's when she heard a voice behind her, calm and gentle with the slight rasp of age and cigarettes given up decades ago. "Put it on my card, please," the voice said, and Sarah turned to see the elderly man with the walking cane stepping forward, his wallet already open, his credit card extended toward the cashier. "Sir, you don't have to," Sarah started to say, but the man waved her off with a kind smile and eyes that seemed familiar in a way that made her chest tighten with something she couldn't name. "It's no trouble at all," Frank Morrison said, though he didn't know yet that he was speaking to his granddaughter, didn't know that the universe had just delivered the miracle he had been praying for every night for 40 years. "We've all been where you are. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us that we're not alone." As he reached for his credit card, a $20 bill fell from his wallet and fluttered to the floor. Sarah bent down automatically to pick it up, and when she looked at what was in her hand, when she saw the faded pencil writing in the corner, her entire world shifted on its axis. Written in the corner of that old $20 bill, In handwriting that Sarah recognized from birthday cards and Christmas presents from a lifetime ago, were 4 words that changed everything. For Amy, love Grandpa. Sarah stared at the bill in her hand, her vision blurring with tears she hadn't shed in years, her mind racing back to memories she had buried so deep she thought they were lost forever. She remembered being 4 years old, remembered a man with gentle eyes who used to lift her up to reach the cookie jar, who taught her to tie her shoes and ride a bicycle, who called her his little princess and promised he would always protect her. "Grandpa Frank?" she whispered, the words coming out strangled and uncertain like a prayer she wasn't sure she believed in. Frank Morrison looked at the young woman in front of him, really looked at her for the first time, and saw his daughter Lisa's eyes staring back at him, saw the little girl he had lost 40 years ago grown up into a mother herself, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, but still beautiful, still strong, still is Amy. "Amy," he said, his voice breaking on the name he had spoken out loud every day for 4 decades, the name he had whispered into empty rooms and carried in his heart like a talisman against despair. "Amy, is that really you?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything but cry as 40 years of separation and pain and misunderstanding collapsed between them like a house of cards. Frank dropped his walking cane and wrapped his granddaughter in his arms, both of them sobbing in the middle of a grocery store checkout line, while other customers pretended not to stare, and the teenage cashier wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've been looking for you," Frank whispered into Sarah's hair. "I never stopped looking for you. I thought you were gone forever." Sarah pulled back to look at his face, seeing how he had aged, seeing the lines that worry and grief had carved around his eyes, seeing the love that had never wavered despite decades of absence. "I thought you didn't want us," she said through her tears. "Mom told me you were angry, that you blamed us for leaving, that you never wanted to see us again." Frank shook his head, understanding for the first time how many lies had kept them apart, how many misunderstandings had grown in the silence between them. The truth, when it finally emerged over coffee at the diner where Sarah worked, was more complicated and more heartbreaking than either of them had imagined. Lisa Morrison hadn't left Millbrook because she was angry at her father or because she wanted a new life. She had fled because Amy's father, Lisa's husband, had become increasingly violent and controlling, threatening to hurt both Lisa and Amy if she tried to leave him. He had been out of town that December week in 1983, but Lisa knew he was coming back, knew that his business trip was ending, and knew that she had maybe one chance to escape before he made good on his threats. Lisa had wanted to tell her father the truth, had wanted to ask for his help, but she was terrified that her husband would hurt Frank too, would destroy the man who had raised her with such love and patience. So she made the impossible choice that so many abuse victims make, the choice to suffer alone, rather than risk the safety of someone she loved. She took Amy and fled in the middle of the night, driving west until she reached Arizona, where she changed their names and tried to build a life away from the violence that had consumed her marriage. Sarah learned that her mother had carried guilt about leaving Frank until the day she died, had written him letters she never sent, had told Sarah stories about her grandfather's kindness and love, but had also filled her daughter's head with lies about why they couldn't go home. Lisa had been so damaged by her husband's abuse that she couldn't trust anyone completely, couldn't believe that Frank would welcome them back, couldn't risk the possibility that her father would reject them or worse, that her husband would find them if they made contact. Frank learned that his daughter had died in a car accident when Amy was 16, that his granddaughter had aged out of foster care alone and scared, that she had struggled for years to build a stable life while carrying the weight of secrets and trauma she didn't fully understand. He learned that Sarah had spent her entire adult life feeling rootless and abandoned, never knowing that she had a grandfather who loved her, who had never stopped looking for her, who would have moved heaven and earth to bring her home if he had known where to find her. Frank Morrison's house on Elm Street, which had been silent and empty for so many years, suddenly came alive with the sounds of childhood again. Emma and Jake, who had never known what it meant to have a grandfather, discovered the joy of being spoiled by someone who had 40 years of love to catch up on. Frank converted his basement into a playroom, filled the refrigerator with foods he hadn't bought in decades, and learned the names of cartoon characters and video games that belonged to a world he thought he had lost forever. Sarah quit 2 of her 3 jobs because Frank insisted on helping her financially, not out of charity, but because that's what family does, because he had been saving money for 4 decades with no one to spend it on, because he wanted to give his granddaughter the security and peace of mind that had been stolen from her so many years ago. They spent hours talking, filling in the gaps, sharing stories about Lisa that helped them both understand the woman who had made impossible choices out of love and fear. Frank learned that Amy had inherited Lisa's artistic talent and her stubborn independence, that she had worked her way through community college while raising her children, that she had never stopped hoping that somewhere out there, she had family who might love her if they could find each other. Sarah learned that Frank had kept her childhood bedroom exactly as she had left it, that he had celebrated her birthday every year with a cake for one, that he had donated thousands of dollars to missing children's organizations in hopes of helping other families avoid the pain he had endured. The $20 bill that had brought them together became a symbol of the love that had survived 40 years of separation. Frank had been carrying it since Amy's 5th birthday, money he had set aside to buy her a present that he never got to give her, money he had saved as a reminder that somewhere in the world, he had a granddaughter who deserved all the love he had to offer. Now it sat framed on Sarah's mantelpiece, a reminder that some connections are too strong to break, that some love is too deep to disappear, that sometimes the universe conspires to heal wounds that seem too old and too deep to ever mend. The story of Frank and Sarah's reunion spread through Millbrook like wildfire, reminding people that miracles still happen, that families can be healed, that hope is never truly lost. The grocery store where they found each other became something of a local landmark, with people coming from other towns to see where the Morrison miracle had taken place. The teenage cashier who had witnessed their tearful reunion started a scholarship fund for single mothers, inspired by Sarah's strength and Frank's generosity. Emma and Jake flourished in ways Sarah had never imagined possible. Emma's fever broke the day after they moved into Frank's house, as if the stress and uncertainty that had been making her sick had finally been lifted. Jake's cough disappeared, replaced by laughter that echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. They started calling Frank great-grandpa, and he started calling them his second chance, his proof that love can survive anything if it's strong enough and stubborn enough. Sarah enrolled in nursing school, something she had dreamed of doing for years but had never thought possible. Frank insisted on paying for her education because he said that helping people heal was clearly in her blood, that Lisa would have been proud to see her daughter following her heart instead of just surviving. Sarah discovered that she had a gift for caring for elderly patients, perhaps because she understood what it meant to be alone, to feel forgotten, to need someone to remind you that you matter. The missing person case that had haunted Millbrook for 40 years was finally closed, not because the police solved it, but because the missing people had found their way home. Frank donated Lisa's case files to a nonprofit organization that helps families of missing persons, hoping that their story might give other families hope, might remind them that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when you least expect it. This story isn't just about a family reunion or a grocery store encounter that changed 2 lives forever. It's about the power of small kindnesses to reveal life-changing truths, about the importance of never giving up hope, about the way love can survive decades of separation and misunderstanding. Frank Morrison's decision to help a struggling mother at the checkout line wasn't planned or calculated. He simply saw someone who needed help and chose to offer it, the same way he had been offering help to strangers for 40 years, always hoping that somewhere in the world, someone might show the same kindness to his missing granddaughter. Sarah Martinez could have refused Frank's help, could have been too proud or too embarrassed to accept charity from a stranger. But something in his eyes, something in his voice, told her that this was a man who understood struggle, who had known loss, who offered help not from a place of superiority, but from a place of shared humanity. That moment of connection, that brief exchange between strangers, created the opening that allowed recognition to occur, allowed truth to emerge, allowed healing to begin. If Frank hadn't helped Sarah that day, they might never have found each other. If Sarah hadn't dropped her guard long enough to accept help from a stranger, the $20 bill might never have fallen, the recognition might never have happened, and two people who belonged together might have remained forever separated by misunderstanding and fear. Sometimes the most extraordinary things happen in the most ordinary places, and sometimes the people we're looking for are closer than we think, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right act of kindness to bring them back into our lives. Today, 3 years after that Tuesday afternoon in the grocery store, Frank Morrison and Sarah Martinez have built the family they both thought they had lost forever. Frank is 76 now, slowing down a bit but happier than he has been in 40 years. Sarah graduated from nursing school with honors and works at the county hospital, where she is known for her compassion and her ability to connect with patients who feel forgotten. Emma is 11 and wants to be a doctor like the ones who helped her when she was sick. Jake is 8 and has decided that when he grows up, he wants to be just like great-grandpa Frank, kind and strong and always ready to help people who need it. The $20 bill still sits on Sarah's mantelpiece, but it's no longer the only reminder of Frank's love. The house on Elm Street is full of new memories now, new photographs, new traditions, new reasons to celebrate. Every December 15th, the anniversary of the day Lisa and Amy left Millbrook, the family has a quiet dinner together, remembering the woman who made impossible choices out of love, honoring the mother and daughter who carried so much pain for so long, celebrating the fact that love really can survive anything if it's patient enough and strong enough and stubborn enough to endure. Frank Morrison spent 40 years looking for his granddaughter, never knowing that she was looking for him too, never knowing that sometimes the best way to find what you're looking for is to help someone else find what they need. Sarah Martinez spent her whole life running from a past she didn't understand, never knowing that the family she thought had abandoned her was actually the family that could save her. Their story reminds us that miracles still happen, that families can be healed, that hope is never truly lost, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply be kind to the strangers we meet, because we never know when a stranger might turn out to be exactly the person we've been looking for our whole lives.